All right, guys. I am going to be taking you through the fourth installment of Rob's Gist for the Ohio End of Course exam. Today we are on 1919 to 1941, Prosperity, Depression, and the New Deal. So basically, this is the time between World War One and World War II and what happens in between those two wars. So the first thing to note is that there's a lot of prosperity after World War One within the United States. Now, there's a lot of poverty as well, but the 1920s, you picture the Great Gatsby, right? You picture um, the wealth of the Great Gatsby, and there's a lot of new technologies coming along with industrialization, including things like the automobile. Unlike the 1950s that we've been studying, where the automobile is something that's accessible to the middle class, in the 1920s, only the super rich really have access to a lot of the wealth and technologies, such as automobiles that are coming about. Even though there's a lot of prosperity at this time, it's also really going to be defined by a lot of social unrest. So, for example, we have the Red Scare. So, the first Red Scare. This is not the Joseph McCarthy Red Scare that's going to happen after World War II. In the Cold War. This is the Red Scare that happened before that. But the same idea, fear of communism and anarchism and some of the non-democratic forms of government that are arising around the world. We also have racial intolerance. Down south, Jim Crow laws are continuing with institutionalized racism, meaning that the government state governments down south are actually supporting overt racism. And many African Americans leave the South in the Great Migration to go north, not only for opportunities, but also to escape this racial intolerance that they're experiencing. Unfortunately, while there's not institutionalized racism up north necessarily, there's definitely overt racism. They're paid less, they're treated poorly by many people. They're unable to move into certain communities. Even Upper Arlington. I remember in high school I was taught Upper Arlington, when it was first founded, that specifically said that Black people could not live within the bounds of Upper Arlington. So they didn't come up north and find total equality at all. Another piece of social unrest is anti-immigration attitude. So we have what are called nativists, who really feel like you have to have been born here in America in order to be a legitimate American. And they were fearful of immigrants, their cultures that they were bringing. They were fearful that the Catholics, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews were going to bring a culture that was going to ruin what it meant to be an American. Not only that, they were worried after the Great Depression starts in the 1930s, they're worried about the economy as well and the jobs that immigrants are taking from Americans, or that they perceive they're taking. This gets so bad that the government actually does step in. And in 1917, they pass a law that starts having literacy tests. So they start creating tests that say you basically have to read and write if you want to come to our country. And then in 1924, they also pass a quota system where they actually limit the number of people that can come from each country. So each country kind of gets a quota, and it's based on the percentage of people that were already within the United States at that time from that immigrant group. So it favored the groups that already had a lot of people here and hurt the groups that really hadn't immigrated here much in the past. At the same time, we have a lot of social movements going on. I'm going to give you two examples. One of them is the Harlem Renaissance. So as African Americans have been leaving the South, moving to the North, and they're living in cities and they're living in close quarters. And really, this is the first time in American history that African Americans are freely living close to one another. Down south, even after slavery, I mean, you're talking about the South. It's far more spread out. It's far more not as densely populated as cities. And so African Americans in cities being so close with one another, you see this rise in the pride of being an African American. And what comes out of that is some great stuff. We get some beautiful art. We get great literature. We get music, really the only American music, which is jazz music, which then inspires things like the blues and rock and roll. You get, even today, R&B, rap, country, all of really the most popular music in America comes out of the Harlem Renaissance or is inspired by it. We also get suffrage. So this means the women's right to vote. Suffragists were women trying to get women the right to vote. In 1920, women do get the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, which means not only are they in the political process, but more and more women are also having the confidence to go work outside of the home as well. We also have a social movement for prohibition, meaning they were trying to outlaw the use of alcohol, which they successfully did. They actually partnered with suffragists, and with the 18th Amendment, alcohol was made illegal temporarily based on our Constitution. One of the unintended consequences of this is the rise of the mob. The mob scene in places like Chicago, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, is able to really rise to prominence and get a lot of wealth in the illegal trade of alcohol now that it's been made illegal. So we also have the Great Depression that comes about at this time. And really quickly, some things that you want to know about it. What really starts it? I'm only going to give you a couple examples because you would only ever be asked about a couple examples. So the first is speculation. So we've talked about this very early on in the beginning of the year. Speculators were people who basically gambled on companies that they thought were going to make a lot of money. So they would take out large loans and invest, assuming because the economy had been doing so well, that they would get all that money back and even more money back. The problem is when the economy starts to struggle, they have borrowed a lot of money and now there's nothing for them to pay that money back with. And so a lot of speculators are destroyed, but now they also can't pay back the banks, which now the banks don't have money. And we know that that just creates this terrible cycle. So these speculators took out bad loans, which was a terrible idea. And not only that, they oftentimes invested in bad companies. We also have government monetary policy. So notice the word money is almost in here. Okay, so that just means policy with money. And really, we have no government monetary policy. The government doesn't step in when it should have. It didn't save the banks. It didn't try to save these loans. And as a result, when banks start to fail, which you might remember from at the beginning of the year, when banks starts to fail, now people lose a lot of their money. Companies lose their money. Companies can't take loans out because the banks don't have the money to give the loans. And if they can't take loans out to start businesses, they can't create jobs. So people don't have jobs and they don't have money to spend. And it becomes a vicious cycle. Somebody who tries to fix this after Herbert Hoover is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, gets elected president, and he promises a new deal for the American people. So he has things like the National Recovery Administration, and this is just one example of many, many, many different government groups that he forms to try to put Americans back to work. So he creates groups that hire Americans using tax dollars. They pay Americans to build bridges, to build roads, to create artwork. Oh, there's so many different initiatives that they create in an attempt to try to pay Americans and give them work so that they can survive and also to try to spur on the economy. So the big takeaway is that the U.S. During this time period starts after World War I as incredibly prosperous. But already you see the unrest starting to show. And when the Great Depression hits, it hits us hard. And our country is thrown into quite a bit of turmoil all the way up until World War II starts. And many people would argue World War II is actually what pulls us out of the Great Depression, all of the spending that's going to take place, which we will talk about in the next video. All right, we are done. Go take your quiz on EdSite. Bye, guys.